In this video, we're going to look at probability and finding just the total number of outcomes. There's a little bit of a faster way to do it. So I'm going to reference things that I had done in my previous video, which you haven't watched. You might need to watch in order to fully get what's going on. So in the last video, I had asked you to use a tree diagram to show and list the whole sample space for the independent events of flipping a coin and then spinning a spinner that was labeled 1, 2, 3. Now, if I wanted to just know the total number of outcomes here, so I just want to look for a second. In total, once I draw out the sample space, we had said, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 total possible outcomes, right? There's 6 possibilities that we could get. But I just want to point something out to you. If I flip a coin, I have 2 possibilities. I have heads or tails. And if I had flipped a heads and I spun the spinner, well, the spinner has 3 options, right? I can spin 1, I can spin 2, I can spin 3. And so what you might have noticed is you've got 2 total outcomes for the coin and 3 total outcomes for the spinner. And I wonder if you can see some relationship between 2 and 3 and then our total number of outcomes of 6. Let's look at the next one. We had our table, right? So our table for our 2 different dice, we had a yellow dice, we had a green dice, and we were looking at the whole sample space here, so all of the possibilities for our probability experiment. But if I didn't want to draw out the whole table and still know how many things I was going to be looking at, well, how many options are there for the yellow dice? Well, there are 6 options, right? Because I can roll a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And same with the green die. I can roll a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 possibilities for each. Now, if you count up all of the possibilities, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then as we keep going, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36. So we have now 36 total possible outcomes. And I wonder if you notice some relationship between 6 and 6 and 36. So here's really what's going on. To determine the total number of outcomes for a probability experiment, I'm just going to take the number of outcomes for each independent event and multiply them together, right? So for example, if I want to look at how many outcomes there are when rolling 2 6-sided dice, and I'm looking at that yellow and the green dice, well, if they're 6-sided, there are 6 possible outcomes for my yellow one. For my green one, there are also 6 possible outcomes for the green one. And to determine then the total number of outcomes, if I've got 6 yellow possibilities and 6 green possibilities in total, there are 36 possible outcomes. Now, I didn't list all of them, but I know that in total there's going to be 36 possible outcomes, right? So if all I'm looking to do is figure out, well, how many things could there be? I'm just going to take the total for each and multiply them together really fast, right? So how many outcomes are there if you flip a coin and roll a 6-sided die? Okay, so let's look at each of these things separately. If I was to flip a coin, unless you've got a very strange coin, you can get heads or you can get tails, right? We can get heads or tails. So that means I've got 2 possible outcomes. If I roll a 6-sided die, so that's telling me my possible outcomes are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I have 6 possible things I could get. So I have 6 total outcomes on my dice. 2 outcomes multiplied by 6 outcomes gives me 12 total outcomes, okay? And I can make this as complex as we want. How many outcomes are there if you flip 2 different coins? So in this case, we've got a toonie and a loonie. And we roll 2 different 6-sided die. We've got a green one and a purple one. And we spin a spinner with 4 different regions, right? We've got a blue 1 and a purple 2 and a green 3 and a red 4. We have 4 different outcomes there. So how many possible outcomes could there be? Well, there are 4 outcomes on the spinner. There are 6 outcomes on the die. There are 6 outcomes on the purple die. There are 2 outcomes on my toonie, and there are 2 outcomes on my loonie. And so all I'm going to do now is I'm going to multiply all my possible outcomes together. Okay, so as we're going through this, I mean, you could type in your calculator to see, but 4 times 6 is 24. When we multiply, 4 times 6 is 24. When we multiply by the next 6, we get 144. Then we multiply by the 2 to get 288, and we multiply by 2 again to get 576 total possible outcomes. Now, I definitely don't want to draw that tree. That tree is going to look awful, and it's going to make me hate what's going on. So we needed a faster way of figuring out how many outcomes there are, because as we came up with more and more difficult probability experiments, we got tired of drawing trees. Okay, so that's how we find the total number of outcomes. Simply look at each event that's happening and write out the total number of outcomes for each separate event, and then simply multiply all of those outcomes together to get our total number of outcomes for that probability experiment.